Thank you very much, Dr. McMaster. Good afternoon to all of you. Madam Almal. I look at this audience, and the one thing I can see, Dr. McMaster, is that day in August of 1985 you are talking about, virtually none of them were born. Now, I'm worried about this because society progresses by increasing determination of the young. Now, how can you look at your parents and say they were more militant than what we are? Can't be correct. You see, the doctor was, he had hair there, but he was a bit wilder. We weren't going to demand the release of Nelson. We were going to fetch him from prison. And that was the call that we made on people, because that was how we thought we could approach life. Now, I'm raising this because I'm saying to you that the aspect of successive generations is quite involved in driving democracy. The big challenge, I think, is amply told in the story of time. It's a story of an education system that doesn't work. It's a story of the costliest program of government expenditure. Education budget this year, including university education, is 257 billion. But the yield is different, and when you look at that, it's available, as you know, on YouTube. When you look at that, each one of you can say, regardless of where you come from and your mother tongue, you can say, I am not Tamil. But there are so many countries out there, and so the challenge of this generation is how do you drive change differently? So, the Planning Commission, which of course for the President is a big gamble. You know that in politics, the ability to think through policy, the ability to implement that policy, and the right to pay for that policy is something that frequently comes through elections. But as you see around the world, turn on to CNN and Al Jazeera today, you will know that people are prepared to die for that right, and sometimes prepared to kill for that. What has happened in this country is, unless you want to take it away from me, I'm talking too long. What has happened here is that the President has given this right and responsibility to a commission of 25 people who are outside of government, and then I have the job to hold all this together. And it's an amazing responsibility. Without any strings, without any controls, go through the diagnostic we released in June last year, look at the plan, and now we're in the process of finalization. And when we hand over, as we will in exactly 2 weeks' time, to the Joint Assembly of Parliament on the 15th, what you need to find in that plan is firstly that it's anchored in the Constitution and the values of our Constitution. And we've lifted out of the constitutional values of the founding provisions a commitment to ensure that we can eliminate poverty and reduce inequality by 2050. It's a big challenge. Big challenges, but we need to find something that can compel all South Africans to recommit. And then we know that every chapter that we've written, and there are 13 substantive chapters of work, is technically competent. I was delayed, I'm sorry about that. We were at Steers with essentially the heads of the department, and they were showing me how much you know about the plan, partly because they want to persuade the management of the university to give them more money for the work they must do, and so we were delayed in that process. I wasn't following. But it was a very important exercise because the university needs to take forward the ideas in the plan. You see, when we put these issues on the table, we don't want to own and control them. We want to unleash an energy in South Africa that begins to counteract what has happened since April of 1994. And what happened then is that all of the people, or many of the people, who are so involved in driving the process to bring democracy to our country, outsource their responsibility. Perhaps people took a view, it's now the responsibility of those who sit in Parliament, and we don't need to be involved any longer. And that has been a break in the continuity of the struggle for democracy, because democracy is not an event. It can never be. It's a process, and our Constitution enables us to drive that process forward. What the plan brings into play is an endeavor to re-energize that struggle. Every part of its work must be technically competent. So if you are an engineer, you can look at chapter 4, look at the economic infrastructure chapter and say, actually this makes sense. And you must be able to understand that we don't have all of the answers. There are parts where we are willing to experiment. Our approach to energy security in the future, including more gas, and how we deal very sensitively with the issue of shale gas, all of these are issues that South Africans must talk about. But we can't continue our reliance on coal. But we must have energy security. So these are discussions that we must have. And I think I'd like to believe that students like yourselves have a very important role in helping to take those discussions forward. So technical competence is one of the things that we must have, and then we must strengthen all of the frameworks of accountability. Let me repeat what I said at STIAS this morning. I said, last week the Auditor General released a report on the auditing of local authorities, of which are 243 municipalities now. 7 of them have clean audits. Do we focus merely on praising the 7, as we should? Or do we focus on the 236? Now, if you look at all of the legislation that covers municipalities, Municipal Systems Act, Municipal Structures Act, it requires a high degree of participation in the democracy. Ward committees, ward councillors reporting back to communities at least 4 times a year. If you have those kinds of things, you shouldn't have a report such as the Auditor General released last week. Why are citizens outsourcing that responsibility? What the plan wants to do is to insource the action to ensure that we can make democracy work differently. Our policies must, of course, have certainty and predictability. But very importantly, the way in which the plan is crafted, it must all be linked. So, going back to our diagnostic in June last year, we say there's a relationship between what happens in education and the poor outcomes for the majority of black South Africans and what happens in the workforce. Why our labour markets function so poorly, because people leave school too poorly skilled. We've got to drive the change. We've got information available, readily available. Go online, find it. And it's not a grade 12 problem, because we've got national assessments at grade 3, grade 6, and grade 9. We've got to drive the change, but it involves many more people. There are reports available on time and task for teachers. Why is it that where parents are involved and competent and empowered through school governing bodies to act, because they have the necessary skills to be able to engage teachers, schools perform, and where parents feel incompetent or powerless against teachers, the schools don't function? These are the kinds of issues that we need to drive to ensure that Tantley serves as a conscience to each one of us, so we can drive the changes as they present, because they're all around us if we open our eyes and find that out. But if we want democracy, if we want the quality of life that we know that we're capable of, then I think there's one single message that comes through the plan. And that is, each one of us needs to take ownership and responsibility. Each one of us needs to take responsibility to lead. Because leadership is not the big man notion of leadership any longer. It has never been, but we must not allow the media to tell us that, because that's what you can say now in 40 characters on Twitter. Nice hashtag, but don't worry about it for now. We need to involve everybody in the responsibility of leadership. Because leadership needs to be distinguished from the authority of office. Leadership is about behavior. It's about engagement. It's about taking responsibility. And if we've got that, then we have active citizenship. If we have active citizenship, then we have a functioning democracy. Then you deal differently. You root out corruption because there's no place to go. Then we can ensure that South Africans are value for money. If you don't care as citizens, why should government action? Because all that stands between us and not doing the right thing is things in our heads. But we need citizens to be active, driven, and engaged. And that's what the plan is about. And that is what the quality of democracy is about. And that is see the re-engagement of the long history of struggle to bring democracy into our country. So we're saying it's beyond technical issues. It's about identifying the problems that need to be solved. I can take education, talk you through that. I can take labour markets and talk you through that. And then remember that the National Planning Commission is not a political party, nor are we government. We have a bit of an identity crisis, of course. But we will be saying many of the things that many political parties will be saying. We're raising the issues the government ought to be raising. We are not responsible for implementation, and so we need to construct a framework of engagement around these issues. We need to be exceedingly inclusive in our approaches. That's what we must recognize. As we develop that platform for inclusivity, we will recognize, I think, that there are things that parties fight about and things that parties should all agree about. The right of access to education is not a party political thing. It's a constitutional imperative. The right of access to decent education should be an extension of that same constitutional value. The right of opportunity in life, with an emphasis on people who come from historical disadvantage, is part of that constitutional imperative. It's there, it's written in the values, in the founding provisions, in the Bill of Rights of our Constitution. And that is what must be what anchors our approach to how we take these issues forward. The technical detail we can add, but if everything is somebody else's responsibility, if we are too small, too disempowered to engage with these issues, then I think we afford the skilled South Africans to do two things. One is amass wealth, because each one of you will leave this university very well educated, capable of earning loads of money, and then you can buy yourself out of society. You can live in a gated community, you can have your own protection, you can send your children to private schools, you can have private health care, you can do all of those things and replicate advantage without having to move to Perth or San Diego. You can do it right here in South Africa. But that is not what democracy is about. Our responsibility is to drive change collectively, and in driving change, it's about understanding ourselves as South Africans and Africans, and looking also at our responsibility towards others and our broader community. That's a challenge. That's all the plan is. We can give it to you, as we will, 2 weeks' time, in 500 pages. We can multiply that by 10, we can get it in 5,000 pages. But we'd like you to have it in a simple paragraph. It's about your responsibility to society and recognizing that the task of building democracy is incomplete as we speak. Thank you very much.
We want to thank Mr. Manuel for the very inspiring message. I'm sure most of us are inspired by what was just said. We're going to move over to the critical engagement part of today. And what that will entail is we're going to take 3 questions at a time from the audience. And we ask of you to please raise your hand. The roaming mic will be brought to you. And please keep your question or remark very short, 15 seconds at most. and then you can take 3 at a time, and Mr. Manuel will reply on that. Thank you very much. Yes, please tell your name and maybe what you study, and if you want to give more personal information to that, you're welcome. And then the rugby mic will be yours. Thank you very much. Here we have our first question at the back there. More hands. There's a hand here at the front. There we go.
You mentioned that you spent 253 million, 257 billion on education. What is the size of the social grant budget, and how are we going to get away from being social economy?
Okay, country next hand. Back there.
I just wanted to know what your opinion would be on tertiary education outside of universities, such as tech economies and stuff like that. Regarding what happened in UJ at the beginning of the year and the scramble for university education, what is your opinion on other forms of tertiary education, such as tech economies?
One last question. We've got also a number of at the front here. The mic at the front here. Okay, sorry, there's a question at the back. We'll take the next round at the back there.
Good afternoon, Minister Manuel. You said that the NEP is grounded in the values of the Constitution. So, and basically, like Dr. Bampela and Brian Cantor, like amazing people in the business sector, so on, has helped both the ANC and the DA with their respective 8% growth plans and the NEP. So I just want to ask, why was your NEP thrown out? I mean, what should we put on board? Because a lot of your policies contradict each other. So, like, why not? I mean, actually, implement the NEP, because it's a good plan. It took you months to get the information, the statistics, the coding, etc. So why is the government going to implement it soon?
Okay, that's that for first round question.
Thank you very much. The social security budget is around the 100 billion mark. We shall check and just confirm the number for that. It's important that we just break down that number a little bit. There are about 2.25 million social overage pension. Just under 2 million recipients of disability grants. And then there are probably about 650,000 beneficiaries of foster grants, parents who have children. The largest number of social grant recipients are children under the age of 18, and I think they are now about just over 11 million. One in 4 South Africans, give or take, is on some or other social grant. It's a very important question because, you know, if you take all of social security, you have to add in some others which are contributory as we speak. You have to add in things like the road accident fund that deals with victims of road accidents. You have to add in unemployment insurance fund, which again is a contributory fund, and workers' compensation. But, you know, those last pension funds are paid for outside the budget. The question that we have to try and resolve is these 11 million, give or take, for children. It's a very small contribution, but I think you've got to see it in a context that recognizes that nutritional support is fundamentally important for cognitive development. I think that what we need to recognize is that it's a very difficult call. It probably is affordable at the kind of levels we're speaking of. But when you look at some of the European social budgets, for instance, including the fact that all pensions are funded as you go on budget, it becomes unaffordable, and then you impose incredible hardship. Getting the balances right is something we need to talk about. I don't think we're ever perfect at that. The problem, of course, is compounded by high levels of unemployment. You know, an old age person ought to be able to live off their budget, but if there are 8 mouths to feed off that pension, 8 mouths to feed, it doesn't spread very far. So that's one side. There's another side of it which is worth talking about. A lot of poor people are finding themselves in debt traps as a result of unsecured lending. And that imposes a hardship and also a very big wage push in industrial relations negotiations. These are issues I think South Africans must be talking about a lot more. Your name is Carl. Shah. Also Shah. At the back? Heinz. Okay. It's okay. Because the next person's name is Minister Manuel. She said her name is Minister Manuel. One of the things we need to do in South Africa is to refocus the further education and training system so that we actually produce a cadre of artisans. And perhaps the best example of what is happening, or what the possibilities are, is in Germany. The duale system takes young people, and there's a split education between the time in class and the time in the factory. And this is what has created this cadre of very wealthy German artisans. Because you do a 5-year apprenticeship, and if you want to train other apprentices, you do an additional 2 years in your own time to become a master artisan. But as that happens, I think it becomes possible to understand that not everybody is going to make it through university. And sometimes it's actually better to take a vocational route, but you must then have a training system that's much better than our current FET system. We have not an underfunded national skills fund because it's a payroll contribution, but we need employers to begin to take more responsibility for the active training. They mustn't see it as a tax that's just gone for payroll and now it's somebody else's responsibility. It's one of the places where we actually need to deal with responsibility differently. It's very important that we deal with those issues. We will then be able to, I think, stream people differently. You mentioned technicons. We need technicons, we need FET colleges, and we need universities. Each one of them needs to have a distinct role. We shouldn't conflate these things, and I think we should ensure that there's access for more people to a further more higher education system, depending on the skills and acumen of the particular individual. Now, Minister Manuel, I didn't actually follow your question, because I don't know that government has thrown this thing out. I am a member of cabinet, and I sat in the cabinet meeting yesterday. And I said to you that on the 15th of August, there will be a joint sitting of Parliament at 10 in the morning, where on behalf of the National Planning Commission, I will hand the plan to the President, who receives it on behalf of all South Africans. And between my speaking and his speaking in Parliament, every political party represented in Parliament will speak. Now, I know that one leader of one party has said that the ANC doesn't support it, but the ANC released a statement from Lekgotla. In fact, just yesterday the statement was released, that comes out in support of the National Development Plan, not as an ANC program, but as something for all South Africans. So nobody's rejected it. In fact, if the ANC didn't want it, they would have to fire me first, I imagine. But they can't fire me, they have to unelect me because I'm a member of the National Executive. No, I think it is an ANC program in as much as it's a program of every other party. In fact, curiously, I spoke in Johannesburg, I think it was Wednesday last week, and And as I was leaving, I bumped into former President F.W. de Klerk, and he said to me, we greeted, and he said to me, I'm going to say nice things about the Planning Commission today. I hope it's not a kiss of death for you. It isn't. We want every South African, every notable and non-notable South African to own the plan. And I think then we will reconstruct what binds us together as a nation. Because the Constitution does it. Now, I still don't know your name, you know, you Mr. Dunmore says a total of social grants in 12-13 is 111 million. I said I would give or take, yeah. That's about half.
Great, thank you. Let's round up questions. You've got a hand in the front here.
My name is Alvin Kirsten. I work at Presidency. My question goes on to your last remark about ownership. Last week we had the opportunity of listening to President Grant, and I asked him how do you plan to create buy-in for this plan? I want to rephrase that now and ask, how do we take ownership of this plan? How do we get people to care? How do we get people to become citizens?
Next time. You put a hand in the front here.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Sean Lee.
Closer to your mouth. Closer to your mouth.
My name is Sean Lee. My question, like the question of the MPC, is the principle of trust. How do things like the secrecy bill, the polygamy for president, and general government incompetency support this idea of joint ownership and responsibility?
Right, we lost hand for this round. You can have the lady in the aisle, yes. Just wasn't quite.
My name is Kirsty Vikas, and I'm at the study of cardiovascular physiology. Thank you very much for an eye-opening talk. My question is, as students of Stellenbosch, we often take our privileges for granted. How can we as students use these privileges to make an impact on a broader scale?
I want to try your question. I didn't get your name. I know you were kind of asking the but I want to try it with Zed's. A big challenge, you see, it's a big challenge that confronts us in South Africa. And that is that people who have skills opt out. And the response, I think part of what we're trying to do is to engender an opt-in. A few years ago, I had a visit in this country by the Treasurer of the Federal Australian Government. Some of the Australians set up to go to Martin clinics in Kayamandi and Prins. And he was completely overwhelmed by what he saw, by the commitment of Stellenbosch students who clearly didn't come from the communities that they were served. Now, that's good. I think that the whole program of this university offers an opportunity for every student to get involved. You see, in many ways, student life offers a different opportunity because A, you need to ensure that Stellenbosch is not this rarefied park where the oak trees grow. It needs to be enlarged. It needs to be enlarged, and there needs to be a very detailed and deep commitment so that we construct a learning opportunity. In the talk this morning, somebody mentioned the Reynolds Girls' School and the teacher-pupil ratios and so on. And I was saying that in Limpopo, in the eastern parts of Limpopo, there's a school called Miru. Its results are incredibly strong every year, and that school serves one of the poorest communities in this country. And one of the reasons operates at well. Actually, the current principal was a student at that school. One of the reasons why it operates at well is that learners stay at school until after 5 every day, and teachers go home. But on a rotational basis, parents come in and supervise the work that happens in the afternoon. So school governing body operates optimally in a poor community and involves the parents, and that commitment is what creates the pride and ownership. And nobody in that community wants Bury High School to fail. And if we can replicate that, go to Kaimandi, go everywhere, and ensure that we can replicate models of excellence, I think we will begin the process of transformation. And when communities know that there are people who look out for them and back them, and when students, I was very encouraged this morning by being reminded of what this university does in involving online education. The university with schools in online education in maths and science, you say this has to be the future. But it can't just be Prof. Van der Merwe and a few other people involved in this. We need students out there sometimes getting to those schools and making that commitment. When Dr. McMaster and a number of, they're very prominent now, the Vice Chancellor of Nelson Mandela was amongst them. They were students and there was no money and there was no grades for doing this. We used to get them off campus every afternoon into communities to support communities in building strong organizations. And the more we do that, the greater contribution we will make to deepening democracy. Now, Jana asks about trust. Let's deal with the issue of the Protection of State Information Bill and look at it in this context. Firstly, I don't think that there's a government anywhere in the world that operates without secrets. Not one, anywhere. Okay? So let's not hope for the ideal. Let's work with what we have and then go to the Constitution. If you go to the Constitution, you will find that in the Bill of Rights, I think it's clause 28, there is a promotion of access to information. And then there is a limitations clause, clause 36. Then you look at the legislation passed. In 2000, there's a Protection of Access to Information Act, PIA as it's called. And if you look at the PIA, well, alongside it was a Protected Disclosures Act that protects whistleblowers that can't be trusted by this legislation. But if you look at the PIA, you will find that there are certain exclusions. And amongst the exclusions in private information would be the medical records of you and me. And that's very important because I think every South African should have the right to privacy on those kinds of issues. But the other issues that are excluded are matters relating to defense, foreign relations, fighting crime, and intelligence. That is specifically excluded in the Protection of Access or Promotion of Access to Information Act. And what does lawless then do? You've got to see this as a set of Russian dolls. There's a constitution, it provides access and limitation. Then you've got the PIA that fits inside it, and sitting inside the PIA is a piece of legislation that must protect particular kinds of information. And if you do that, if you focus on that, you won't say no to the bill. You will say, how should the bill operate? Because you will understand that it's traceable to the letter and spirit of our Constitution. Now, it's that kind of discussion that we don't want to have about. And that's a discussion that we must actually have, because I don't think it's correct that if the police or the SIU are conducting an inquiry on Trevor Manuel believing that he's involved in corrupt activities, that they should be required to publish every step and every bit of information in the media, they will never get a conviction in this country. I think that we must recognize that there's a role in place for all of these things, but it shouldn't be something that actually takes away the right of access to general information. It should never be permitted, and in fact the bill says it cannot be permitted to cover up issues of corruption or to tackle whistleblowers. The act, in fact, the bill, as it was debated in Parliament, it's in the NCP now, deals with those kinds of issues. Unfortunately, I think, and here I'm going to look for a lot of trouble, I smell bad headlines, I'm going to go for the press, I think, somehow became embedded in a position on the bill. And so there isn't fair reporting about what needs to happen, and so we don't want to discuss this issue as most governments should. If we don't have a bill, then we operate under the Official Secrets Act of 1982. Now read that act and understand what gets covered there, and understand that what is before us, it needs to be amended here and there, but what is before us is a very significant development on it. And as we deal with that, I think between you and I, Jean, there's probably going to be a better basis for trust. Thanks.